Welcome, Sarah and Larry. It's wonderful to get you on the line. And we are having a talk here in honor of the mentorship series that we have running in chemical research and toxicology. So first off, Sarah, congratulations on both the realization of this series and the publication of your paper. So could you introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us about your position, which is recently a new one, and tell us a little bit about the topic of the paper.
So the paper is about using novel biomarkers to predict the risk of disease, and it has to do with different types of biomarkers and the analytical chemistry that's being used to measure them. And the reason we picked this topic is because we thought it was a nice intersection between the chemistry and analytical chemistry I learned with Larry and the clinical aspect that I've learned while I was at City of Hope.
And so, Larry, tell us about your position, and could you tell us a little bit about, in your various research and leadership positions, what the role is that you see mentorship playing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Sarah and I were talking about this before we came on, and for me, mentoring is a term that didn't exist when I started my career. I probably didn't even hear about it until I came to Vanderbilt. We had role models, positive and negative, and we learned by watching and imitating. There were no formal mentoring programs, and we had to figure a lot out by trial and error. And that's why I've been really insistent on developing strong mentoring programs at Vanderbilt. It just doesn't make sense to not give young people every tool they need to succeed. That being said, I did have some really good role models, and they had a significant impact on me at key moments in my career. It wasn't a continual interaction, but I would reach out when I needed career advice or insights into experiments, and they always responded. Ned Porter, Bengt Samuelson, Paul Skopp all provided important advice and guidance. And Justin McCormick and Veronica Maher, who were at the Michigan Cancer Foundation, provided absolutely crucial insights that helped me get my first research grant as a new faculty member. And so I appreciated from early on that it was important to ask for help if you needed it, even though I hadn't been encouraged to do it.
And so, I'm going to put you on the spot, Sarah, here with here with Larry, about telling us a little bit about how Larry helped you navigate your career path and really inspire you to pursue your goals.
Yeah, so I think, hearing Larry's words on mentorship, you can tell that something he's passionate about and something that gets passed on to his mentees. So something that I've learned how to mentor others as well from the experience I had from him. But the impact Larry had is it's hard to put into words. He's, one of the most prolific and accomplished scientists in the world, and he's had such a huge impact on the scientific community. But I think as a person and working with him, you just learn that Larry's very kind and understanding and supportive. So he's one of these mentors who makes you feel like you can accomplish anything you put your mind to. Nothing is really outside the realm of possibility when you're working with him, which I think is a huge thing that sets him apart from many other mentors. So just thinking about how the work I did with him has influenced my entire research trajectory, because without his support and encouragement, I would have never pursued the science that I'm doing now.
And what are some of the mentoring approaches that maybe you see coming out in yourself now and impacting your mentoring style?
Well, I think one thing is that, like Larry said, encouraging people to seek out the help that they need. So, it's not a negative to have to ask someone, how do I do this? Or how do I approach this situation? And it's, encouraging to look for the people that can help fill in those gaps. And another huge aspect that Larry had on my career was his ability to teach us how to write. So when I came into his lab, I definitely was not the world's best writer and still have a long way to go. But as busy as Larry is and all his work that he has to do, he always took the time to sit down and go through a manuscript, go through a grant, teach you how to be a good writer. So I'd say the things that he taught me are things that I think of almost on a daily basis when I'm doing any kind of writing or working with other individuals. I think of the words that he shared with me almost on a daily basis.
So what do you think, Larry? Are there any other mentoring habits that you've developed over your career, either purposefully or on accident, that you feel benefited Sarah or other mentees?
Yeah, well, I'm actually very embarrassed to hear Sarah talk about my mentoring style. I'm not sure I knew I was mentoring at the time. It just seemed like what we needed to do to make everybody successful. But yeah, I do have a few things, and in a way, I think it's advice as much as mentoring, and it reflects my career and how I have interacted with members in my group. And I think just a few things. First of all, to be critical of one's data, make sure they're really solid, and listen to what your data are trying to tell you. Test your hypothesis. Don't try to prove it. We've always reviewed data very carefully in our group, and I think it helps with experimental design. As Sarah pointed out, I do feel like it's really important to communicate effectively in written and oral form. Take advantage of every opportunity you get to present your work or to write about it. We have informal data presentations in our group every week, and once a semester, students and postdocs give a formal 1-hour lecture with a written report in the form of a manuscript. And I think this has provided important training in communications. Perhaps not necessarily a technique, but I think it's really important to treat people with respect. You don't have to like someone to work with them, but I insist everyone in my laboratory treat everyone else with respect. Having a positive attitude in the lab has an amazing impact on every single member of the group. And I have to say that of the many people that have worked in my group over the years, Sarah was among the most positive individuals that has ever stepped foot in the lab. She just was always encouraging and encouraged to go forward. I think it's really important to follow your nose scientifically and to be fearless experimentally. I've always tried to go where the science leads us and not let a particular experiment determine whether we're going to pursue something, but rather learn whatever the new science is or the new experiments that you need to answer the question. And that's just really fun too, because you're always learning new things.
Yeah, just a few. It's like really rich on so many levels, Larry. Thanks so much. It's both the inspiration and practical approaches. And maybe as a last thing to you, Larry, I think you touched on this at the very beginning in terms of how even the concept of mentorship has changed, but how do you see that the challenges that have helped your mentees navigate their career path has changed over the years? And I mean, you've already mentioned a lot of skills that future leaders will need, but are there any more that you want to add that you really see as particularly emergent?
Yeah, the world has changed really dramatically since I started. Obviously, it's much harder to get grants now than when I started. People were complaining at that point that only 30% of grants were getting funded. You can't imagine that today when it's 12 to 15%. So you really need to take advantage of all of your colleagues' advice to prepare the best possible grant applications. I learned that early in my career, as I said earlier, but you really need to discuss your ideas with your colleagues well before you start writing the grant application. That's the time you really need constructive input, not after you've written the grant. It's game over at that point. And I'm not someone who can write a good grant at the last minute. So give yourself a lot of time to put together a really good grant application. I think it's really important in chemical toxicology, which is at the interface of chemistry and biology, to understand biology at a mechanistic level. And it's more important to do that today than when I started. If you're a chemist, you can't just suggest biology anymore. You have to do it. And in some cases, that may require collaboration, but nobody is in a better position to determine the unique capabilities of chemical approaches to answer biological questions than a chemist. So it's in one's best interest to learn as much as you can about the system you're working in. It's also kind of a corollary to tougher to get grants. It's also more difficult to pursue new fields of investigation now than when I started. Funding cutoffs are so low that people stay in fields where they're recognized. And it's hard to go off in new directions. So a lot of people get stuck in lines of investigation they've been involved with for years, rather than challenging themselves to move into new and exciting areas. And in that regard, the availability of some pilot funding at institutions can be really helpful in enabling one to try new things. You know, as far as key skills for the future for leaders in chemical toxicology, I think they're the same ones that they've always needed. One has to do rigorous, high-quality science and work on important problems. Also, leaders need to be able to recruit and motivate top-notch research team members. There's much more attention given now to being a good mentor, as I said earlier, than when I started, and I think that's a very good thing. It's great to train individuals like Sarah to be the best they can be, and it makes them more productive and engaged scientists when they're working in your laboratory.
Great, thank you so much. I guess if I could squeeze in one more question to both of you. Toxicology is really such an interdisciplinary science, and Larry, you've really highlighted this in your comment about how the requirement to really be deeply involved in the biological system is increased. So with scientists in our area doing research in really diverse academic departments, Sarah has introduced the new department that she is, and also as well as in areas of industry and government. Do you have any advice for young scientists who think, hey, this chemical toxicology stuff is pretty cool, but how could I navigate and look for opportunities to find good mentorship in such a varied landscape?
Yeah. Sarah, you want to go first, and then I'll get
Sure,
back.
yeah. Well, I will let Larry do most of the talking on this, but for instance, for me, it's just been reaching out to people, attending meetings and seeing what other individuals are doing, having an open mind about how something may not seem that it's toxicology, but looking to see how it might fit in with the research that you're doing. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to establish this series is so that those of us that are in the world of toxicology could learn a little bit more about our colleagues and what they're doing, and see how we might be able to build relationships and collaborations and learn what their mentors did. So I think just reaching out and looking for other people is a huge help.
Yeah, I would just amplify that. And it does relate to something that I had thought about maybe sharing, that in the way of advice. And it was something that I followed from really early on, and it was passed on to me from a senior colleague. And that is to define yourself and your program internationally. We are all part of a community in this world, and it's a much smaller world than 35 or 40 years ago when I started. And so, you know, I always sort of realized that I would be competing with and working with people all over the world. I had done a postdoc in Stockholm, and so that, I think, really helped amplify to me the fact that there were great scientists everywhere. But I knew I'd have to compete with them, and so going to meetings was really important to see what they were doing, get ideas from them. And now, especially with regard to mentorship, as Sarah pointed out, your colleagues in an area like toxicology, where there might only be one or two other people in your institution who you might consider chemical toxicologists, but you can reach out to this community. And it's one of the few good things that's happened in this pandemic. We've all become comfortable with communication, digital communication methods that enable us to connect. And every single one of us, I'm sure, has watched multiple seminars from colleagues all over the world in our seminar programs. And so it's just so much easier to identify people at other institutions that you'd like to talk with and get mentorship from or research ideas. And so I think not only the Journal of Chemical Research and Toxicology has a role, but the Division of Chemical Toxicology is also fundamentally important to the careers of our young faculty and for the future of the discipline.
Great. Well, thank you both. And I think, this international note is one I can certainly take to heart, though I think it was more accidental than anything else.